The courthouse steps were slick with morning rain when Sarah Mitchell walked up them for what she thought would be the last time. Her worn sneakers squeaked against the marble, a sound that seemed to announce her poverty to everyone within earshot. She clutched a manila folder containing her final appeal, knowing it was likely hopeless. For 3 years she'd been fighting her uncle's estate lawyers, watching them drain what little remained of her grandmother's inheritance, with endless legal fees. Sarah had exactly $47 in her checking account and a maxed-out credit card. What she didn't know was that in exactly 93 minutes, she would become one of the wealthiest people in the state. The law firm of Blackstone, Mercer & Associates occupied the entire 15th floor of the glass tower downtown. Sarah had been here before, sitting in their sterile conference room, while lawyers in $1,000 suits explained why she wasn't entitled to her grandmother's modest house on Maple Street. Today felt different though. The receptionist's smile seemed forced, and there was something almost nervous in her voice when she said, "They're ready for you now, Miss Mitchell." Sarah walked into the conference room expecting the usual cast of characters. Richard Blackstone, the senior partner who spoke to her like she was a particularly slow child, and his associate, Jennifer Reyes, who had perfected the art of looking sympathetic while denying every claim. But today there were 3 additional people at the table she'd never seen before. A woman in her 60s with silver hair and kind eyes. A man who looked like he might be from another law firm entirely, and someone Sarah could only describe as official-looking, with a briefcase that seemed important. "Miss Mitchell," Blackstone began, his usual condescending tone replaced by something that sounded almost respectful. "Thank you for coming today. I believe you know why we've asked you here." Sarah sat down slowly, her folder still clutched in her hands. "Actually, I don't. I thought we were here to discuss my final appeal regarding my grandmother's estate." The silver-haired woman leaned forward. "Miss Mitchell, my name is Dorothy Patterson. I was your grandmother's attorney for the past 15 years. The real attorney, not these people." She gestured dismissively at the Blackstone team. "I've been out of the country dealing with a rather complex international matter. When I returned last week, I discovered something that frankly appalled me." Sarah's heart began to race. Something was happening here that she didn't understand, but the shift in the room's energy was unmistakable. Blackstone's face had gone pale, and his associate was shuffling papers nervously. "What kind of something?" Sarah asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Dorothy Patterson opened her own briefcase and withdrew a thick stack of documents. "Your grandmother, Rose Mitchell, was not just the sweet old lady who lived in the house on Maple Street. She was Rose Mitchell, the founding partner of Mitchell Technologies, the company that was sold 6 months after her death for $2.8 billion. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She actually felt herself sway in her chair. That's impossible. My grandmother cleaned houses. She worked for other people her whole life." "No, dear," Dorothy said gently. "Your grandmother was one of the most brilliant software engineers of her generation. She founded Mitchell Technologies in 1987 with 2 partners. The company developed the encryption software that's used in 80% of the world's banking systems." Sarah stared at the woman, trying to process what she was hearing. Her grandmother Rose had died 3 years ago, leaving behind what Sarah had been told was a modest estate. The small house, some savings, and a few personal items. The lawyers had claimed most of it went to pay debts and taxes, leaving Sarah with almost nothing. "But the house," Sarah stammered. "They said there were debts, taxes." "Lies," Dorothy said simply. "All of it. Your grandmother's will was very clear. You were to inherit everything. But everything wasn't just a house and some savings. It was her 47% stake in Mitchell Technologies." The official-looking man with the briefcase finally spoke. "Miss Mitchell, my name is David Harper. I'm with the Securities and Exchange Commission. We've been investigating the sale of Mitchell Technologies for the past 8 months. What we discovered is that your grandmother's stake was sold without proper authorization from her estate. The sale should never have been allowed to proceed." Sarah felt like she was in a dream, or maybe a nightmare. Nothing made sense. "But Uncle Robert said he was handling everything. He said Grandma left the house to him, and there was nothing for me." Blackstone cleared his throat. "About that, Miss Mitchell, it appears there may have been some irregularities in how your uncle presented the documentation to us." Dorothy Patterson's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Irregularities? Is that what we're calling fraud now?" She turned to Sarah. "Your Uncle Robert forged your grandmother's signature on a revised will, He bribed a clerk to backdate it. He convinced these lawyers that he was the rightful heir. And when the technology company was sold, he pocketed nearly $1.2 billion. The room went silent except for the sound of rain against the windows. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. "Where is he now?" she asked quietly. The SEC investigator consulted his notes. "Currently residing in a non-extradition country, we believe, but that doesn't matter for your situation. The sale has been ruled invalid. Mitchell Technologies has been required to purchase back all outstanding shares at current market value." He paused. "Which means, Miss Mitchell, that you now own assets worth approximately $3.1 billion. Sarah stared at him. The number was so large it didn't seem real. $3 billion. It was more money than she could even comprehend. "I don't understand," she whispered. "How could this happen? How could they just steal everything and get away with it?" Dorothy Patterson reached across the table and put her hand on Sarah's arm. "They didn't get away with it, dear. Justice is slow sometimes, but it does come. Your grandmother was a remarkably smart woman. She built safeguards into her will, triggers that would activate if anything suspicious happened to her estate. When the technology company was sold so quickly after her death, it raised red flags with the SEC. But you," Sarah turned to look at Blackstone and his associate, "you all knew this was happening. You helped him steal from me." Blackstone's face was flushed red. "Miss Mitchell, I assure you that we acted in good faith based on the documentation provided to us by your uncle. If there were irregularities, we were not aware of them." "Bullshit," Sarah said, surprised by the venom in her own voice. "You knew exactly what you were doing. You saw a poor girl who couldn't afford to fight you, and you figured you could just steamroll over me and take whatever you wanted." The room fell silent. Sarah had never spoken to anyone in a position of authority like this before, but something had shifted inside her. Maybe it was the knowledge that she wasn't powerless anymore. Maybe it was 3 years of accumulated anger, finally finding its voice. "The firm will of course be returning all fees collected in relation to this matter," Blackstone said stiffly. "That's not nearly enough," Dorothy Patterson interjected. "Sarah, you should know that this law firm has been paid over $400,000 in fees from your uncle over the past 3 years, money that was rightfully yours." Sarah stood up from her chair. She was no longer the scared, broke young woman who had walked into this building an hour ago. "Mr. Blackstone, you and your firm actively participated in stealing my inheritance. You're going to do more than just return your fees." "I'm not sure what you're implying, Miss Mitchell," Blackstone said, but his voice lacked its usual authority. "I'm not implying anything," Sarah replied. "I'm stating facts. You're going to return every penny you took, with interest. You're going to pay for all the legal costs I've incurred over the past 3 years fighting you. And you're going to write a formal apology acknowledging your firm's role in this fraud." She paused, looking around the room. "Because if you don't, I'll make sure that every potential client knows exactly what kind of people you are." The silence stretched for 30 seconds that felt like 30 minutes. Sarah could see the calculation happening behind Blackstone's eyes, the mental arithmetic of reputation damage versus financial loss. What he couldn't know was that Sarah was running her own calculations, and the numbers were staggering. Not just the money, though that was overwhelming enough. The power. For the first time in her adult life, Sarah Mitchell had power, and the feeling was intoxicating. "Miss Mitchell," Blackstone finally said, his voice carefully controlled, "I think we may have gotten off on the wrong foot today. Perhaps we should discuss this more collaboratively." "Collaboratively?" Sarah laughed, and there was nothing pleasant about the sound. "Like how we collaborated when you told me my grandmother's house had to be sold to pay taxes that didn't exist. Or when your associate here explained to me that poor people shouldn't expect to inherit wealth they haven't earned." Dorothy Patterson was watching Sarah with something that looked like pride. "Sarah, there's more you need to know. The investigation uncovered something else. Your uncle didn't just steal your inheritance. He's been using your grandmother's stolen money to fund some very questionable business ventures." The SEC investigator opened his briefcase again. "Miss Mitchell, your uncle has been operating what appears to be a sophisticated investment fraud scheme. He's taken money from elderly investors, promising them high returns on technology investments. He's bilked at least 40 families out of their life savings, using your grandmother's reputation in the tech industry as collateral for his credibility." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "How much?" "Conservative estimate, $12 million in victim losses over the past 2 years. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her uncle hadn't just stolen from her. He'd used her grandmother's good name, her legacy, to victimize other people. Families who had probably worked their whole lives to save money, just like her grandmother had. There's a civil lawsuit being prepared by the victims' families, Dorothy continued. They're seeking damages not just from your uncle, but from the estate that enabled his fraudulent activities. Under normal circumstances, that would be a problem. But in this case, I can fix it, Sarah finished. I can pay them back. All of them, the investigator confirmed. And still have more money than you could spend in 10 lifetimes. Sarah sat back down, overwhelmed. An hour ago she'd been worried about making rent. Now she was responsible for righting wrongs that affected dozens of families. It should have felt crushing, but instead it felt like purpose. I want to meet them, she said. The victims. I want to look them in the eye and apologize for what my family did to them. That's not necessary, Miss Mitchell, Blackstone interjected. We can handle the settlements through proper legal channels. There's no need for you to subject yourself to emotional confrontations. Sarah turned to look at him, and for the first time since walking into the room, she smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. Mr. Blackstone, I don't think you understand your position here. You're not my lawyer. You never were. You were my uncle's accomplice, and now you're going to sit quietly while I decide what happens next. Dorothy Patterson pulled out another set of documents. Sarah, there's one more thing. Your grandmother left you a letter. She instructed me to give it to you only after you learned the truth about her business. With shaking hands, Sarah took the envelope. Her grandmother's handwriting was still clear and strong. For my Sarah, when she discovers who she really is. Inside, the letter was brief but devastating in its clarity. My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, it means the worst has happened, and Robert has tried to steal what belongs to you. I always knew he was weak, but I hoped he wouldn't be evil. I'm sorry you've had to fight for what should have been freely given. The money doesn't matter, sweetheart. Money is just a tool. What matters is what you do with it. You have a choice now. You can take this fortune and disappear, live a comfortable life and forget about everyone else. Or you can remember that wealth is responsibility. I built Mitchell Technologies, not to get rich, but to solve problems. The encryption software protects people's privacy and security. It makes the world a little bit safer. I hope you'll find your own way to make the world better. The victims of Robert's crimes deserve justice. The families he's hurt deserve compensation. But more than that, they deserve to know that not everyone in the Mitchell family is a thief and a liar. Show them who you really are, Sarah. Show them who we really are. With all my love, Grandma Rose. Sarah folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. When she looked up, everyone in the room was watching her. Dorothy, I want you to be my attorney going forward. Can you arrange a meeting with the fraud victims for tomorrow? Of course. But Sarah, are you sure you want to move this quickly? You've just learned life-changing information. Maybe you should take some time to process. No, Sarah interrupted. I've had 3 years to think about justice while you people, she looked at Blackstone, were stealing from me. I'm done waiting. The SEC investigator leaned forward. Miss Mitchell, there's something else you should consider. Your new financial position makes you a target. You'll need security, financial advisors, probably a team of attorneys. There are people who will try to take advantage of your situation. Like they did, Sarah nodded toward Blackstone. Exactly like that. But now you have the resources to protect yourself. Sarah stood up again. She felt different now, like she was inhabiting a new version of herself. Dorothy, I want you to arrange something else. I want every local news station in the city at that meeting tomorrow. I want the story told properly. I want people to know what happened here. Miss Mitchell, Blackstone said urgently, I would strongly advise against that course of action. Public attention could complicate matters legally. For whom? Sarah asked. For me, or for you? When he didn't answer, she continued, because I think what you're really worried about is that people will find out exactly how your firm operates. How you prey on people who can't afford to fight back. That's not fair. Jennifer Reyes spoke for the first time since the meeting began. We were given documentation that appeared legitimate. We acted in good faith. Sarah turned her attention to the associate. Did you? Because I remember our very first meeting, Ms. Reyes. I remember you telling me that I needed to be realistic about my expectations. That girls like me don't usually inherit wealth. That I should be grateful for whatever crumbs I might receive. Reyes flushed red. I was trying to prepare you for disappointment. No, you were trying to convince me not to fight. Because you knew that if I fought hard enough, I'd eventually uncover the truth. Sarah gathered her things. Gentlemen, ladies, this meeting is over. Dorothy, I'll expect to hear from you by the end of the day about tomorrow's arrangements. As Sarah walked toward the door, Blackstone called out, Miss Mitchell, I hope you'll reconsider the public nature of this situation. It could be damaging for everyone involved. Sarah paused with her hand on the door handle. Mr. Blackstone, you spent 3 years convincing me that I was powerless. That I didn't matter. That people like you could do whatever you wanted to, people like me, and there would never be any consequences. She turned back to face him. You were wrong about that. And tomorrow, the whole city is going to know just how wrong you were. Dorothy Patterson gathered her materials and followed Sarah out of the conference room. In the elevator, the older woman smiled. Your grandmother would be very proud of you today. I haven't done anything yet, Sarah replied. Oh, but you have. You've found your backbone, that's the hardest part. As they descended toward the lobby, Sarah felt the full weight of her new reality settling in. Billions of dollars. Dozens of families to help, a corrupt uncle to bring to justice, a law firm to hold accountable. And somewhere in the middle of all that she had to figure out who Sarah Mitchell was going to be now that she wasn't poor anymore. The elevator doors opened, and Sarah stepped out into her new life. The community center on 5th Street had never hosted a billionaire before, but then again, most billionaires probably wouldn't have chosen to meet fraud victims in a building with flickering fluorescent lights and folding chairs that had seen better decades. Sarah arrived early, wanting to set up the space herself rather than have someone do it for her. She arranged the chairs in a circle, not rows. This wasn't going to be a lecture or a press conference. Despite the 3 news crews setting up cameras in the back, this was going to be a conversation. Dorothy Patterson arrived with a stack of files containing information about each victim family. Are you sure you want to do this? She asked for the 3rd time that morning. The settlement offers could be handled through legal channels. You don't have to put yourself through this emotional ordeal. Sarah was setting up a coffee station with supplies she'd bought herself at the grocery store. Premium coffee, real cream, pastries from the bakery downtown. Small gestures but important ones. Dorothy, these people had their life savings stolen by my uncle, using my grandmother's reputation as bait. The least I can do is look them in the eye when I apologize. The first family to arrive was the Hendersons, both in their 70s, walking slowly and holding hands. Margaret Henderson was wearing what was obviously her best dress, navy blue, with small flowers, and her husband Frank had put on a tie that looked like it hadn't been worn in years. They looked nervous and hopeful and heartbroken all at once. Mrs. Henderson, Mr. Henderson. Sarah approached them with her warmest smile. I'm Sarah Mitchell. Thank you so much for coming today. Margaret Henderson's eyes filled with tears immediately. Oh, honey, you look just like your grandmother did when she was young. We met her once, at a technology conference in 1995. She was so brilliant, so kind. When your uncle approached us with the investment opportunity, we trusted him because of her reputation. Sarah felt the familiar stab of anger at her uncle, but she kept her voice gentle. Please, sit down. Can I get you some coffee? I want to hear your story. Over the next 20 minutes, other families filtered in. The Kowalskis, who had invested their entire retirement savings. The Williams family, who had taken out a second mortgage on their house. The elderly Mr. Peterson, whose wife had recently died, and who had invested her life insurance payout, hoping to leave something for his grandchildren. Each story was heartbreaking in its own way, but what struck Sarah most was how similar they all were. Robert Mitchell had targeted good people who worked hard their whole lives, people who trusted others because they themselves were trustworthy. He had used Rose Mitchell's reputation as a brilliant engineer and successful businesswoman to convince them that investing with him was safe, even lucrative. By the time the last family arrived, Sarah's resolve had hardened into something unshakable. She stood up and addressed the group. Ladies and gentlemen, I know you're wondering why I asked you all here today. I could have had my attorney send you settlement checks and avoided this meeting entirely. But I needed to look at you to see the faces of the people my family harmed, because what happened to you is my responsibility now. An uncomfortable murmur went through the group. These were polite people, people who didn't like to make others feel bad, even when they had every right to be angry. "You don't owe us anything, dear," Margaret Henderson said. "It's not your fault what your uncle did." "Isn't it?" Sarah asked. "He used my grandmother's name, her reputation, her company's success, to convince you to trust him. He stole money that should have been mine, and used it to fund his fraudulent schemes. If I had been paying attention, if I had fought harder 3 years ago when Grandma died, maybe I could have stopped this before it started." She paused, looking around the circle at faces that showed 3 years of financial stress, sleepless nights, and broken trust. "But I can't change what happened. I can only decide what happens next." Dorothy Patterson stood up. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have settlement offers here for each family. These offers will restore your full investments plus 3% annual interest for the time you've been without your money." Sarah held up her hand. "Actually, Dorothy, I've changed my mind about those settlement offers." The room went silent. Several people looked frightened, probably wondering if the offers were being withdrawn. "I've decided that 3% interest isn't enough. You've all suffered not just financial losses, but emotional distress, family stress, health problems from the worry. So I'm doubling the settlement offers. Full restoration of your investments plus $25,000 in additional compensation for each family." The room erupted. People were crying, hugging each other, trying to thank Sarah all at once. She raised her voice to be heard over the emotion. "But there's more. Mr. Peterson, you mentioned that you had hoped to leave something for your grandchildren. I'm establishing college funds for each of your grandchildren. Full 4-year scholarships to any accredited university." The elderly man broke down completely, sobbing into his hands. "And Mrs. Williams, you mentioned that you and your husband had to take early retirement because of the financial stress. I'm setting up pension supplements that will restore your planned retirement income until you reach the age you originally intended to retire." Sarah looked around the room at faces that showed shock, gratitude, and something else: the restoration of dignity. "But most importantly, I want you all to know that my grandmother would be horrified by what my uncle did to you. She built her company to help people, to protect them. She would want me to make this right." One of the news camera operators gestured to his reporter that they were getting good material. Sarah noticed and addressed the cameras directly. "I also want the people watching this to understand something. My uncle Robert Mitchell is a criminal who stole from elderly victims using a respected family name. But the lawyers who helped him, who took hundreds of thousands of dollars in fees while denying legitimate claims, they're just as guilty." She turned to look directly into the main camera. "The law firm of Blackstone, Mercer and Associates spent 3 years convincing me that I had no right to my inheritance. They told me that poor people like me shouldn't expect to inherit wealth. They participated in fraud, and they profited from it. They are not the kind of lawyers that honest people should trust with their legal needs." Dorothy Patterson looked nervous. "Sarah, you might want to be careful about making specific accusations on camera." "Why?" Sarah asked. "Because they might sue me? With what money? I can afford better lawyers than they can now. In fact, I think I'll hire an entire law firm just to investigate their practices over the past 10 years. I bet we find other victims." After the formal meeting ended and the cameras were turned off, Sarah spent another hour talking with individual families, learning about their lives, their dreams, their fears. By the time she left the community center, she understood something fundamental about wealth that she hadn't grasped that morning. Money wasn't the goal. Money was the means. Her grandmother had figured that out decades ago, when she built technology to protect people's privacy, instead of just getting rich. Now Sarah had to figure out her own version of that philosophy. Her phone had been buzzing all day with calls from financial advisors, investment managers, and wealth consultants, all wanting to help her manage her billions. She ignored most of them, but there was one call she decided to take. "Miss Mitchell, this is David Chen from the Financial Crimes Division of the FBI. We've been following your case, and we have some information about your uncle's whereabouts that might interest you." Sarah's pulse quickened. "What kind of information?" "He's not as unreachable as he thinks, and he's made some mistakes that could allow us to freeze his assets and potentially arrange extradition. Would you be interested in cooperating with our investigation?" Sarah thought about Margaret Henderson's tears, About Mr. Peterson's broken voice when he talked about his late wife's life insurance money. About all the nights these families had probably laid awake worrying about their financial futures. Agent Chen, I'm very interested. What do you need from me? As Sarah drove home to her small apartment, she realized that she still hadn't processed the fundamental reality of her situation. She was a billionaire now. She could buy anything, go anywhere, do anything. But what she wanted most was to see her Uncle Robert in handcuffs, to watch Richard Blackstone explain to a disciplinary board why his firm had participated in fraud, and to make sure that no other families would suffer the way these families had suffered. Tomorrow she would start building the team she needed: investigators, attorneys, financial experts. She would create a foundation to help fraud victims and fund financial literacy programs. She would use her grandmother's money the way her grandmother would have wanted, to protect people and fight injustice. But tonight, she was going to sit in her tiny apartment and eat ramen noodles, and think about how much her life had changed in 24 hours. Because even though she was now worth billions, she was still Sarah Mitchell from Maple Street, and she intended to stay that way.